I pulled the hand mixer from the drawer and stared at the bowl of softened butter and sugar. My arthritis was flaring today, sending shooting pains through my knuckles, but I kept going. This cake wouldn't bake itself, and Margaret's birthday was tomorrow. 73 years I'd been on this earth, and 48 of those years I'd baked my daughter's birthday cake. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, always the same, never a complaint, never a thanks, Mom, just an expectation. As I creamed the butter and sugar together, my phone buzzed. I knew who it was before I even looked. Margaret had a way of calling right when I was in the middle of doing something for her. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up, "Mom, did you remember to get organic eggs for the cake? Kyle's been having those digestive issues again, and the doctor thinks it might be related to—" "Yes, Margaret," I said, glancing at the carton of eggs that had cost me nearly $6. "I got the organic eggs, and you're using the gluten-free flour, right? You know Emily can't have gluten." I looked at the special flour I'd driven an extra 20 minutes to find at the health food store across town. "I've got it covered." "Great. Oh, and one more thing. We need you to pick up Tyler from basketball practice tomorrow. Both Kyle and I have meetings that can't be rescheduled." I paused, my hand halfway to the vanilla extract. Tomorrow was not only Margaret's birthday, but also my weekly physical therapy appointment. After my hip replacement 3 months ago, these sessions were non-negotiable, according to Dr. Winters. "I have physical therapy tomorrow at 4, I said carefully. There was a pause on the other end. "Can't you reschedule it? Tyler's practice ends at 3:30 and we won't be home until at least 6. I gripped the phone tighter. "Margaret, I've already rescheduled twice this month. Dr. Winters was very clear that I need to stay consistent with my recovery." Another pause, longer this time. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had that edge to it, the one that made me feel like I was disappointing a drill sergeant rather than speaking to my own daughter. "Mom, we're in a real bind here. This is important. Family comes first, right? That's what you always taught me. Family comes first." The mantra I'd lived by all these years, the reason I'd moved to this overpriced neighborhood after Harold passed, just to be closer to Margaret and her family, the reason I babysat the grandchildren 3 times a week, drove them to activities, helped with their homework, the reason I was standing in my kitchen making a gluten-free organic egg birthday cake with my arthritic hands. What I said was, "I'll see what I can do." What I thought was, when did family comes first become grandma comes last? I hung up and stared at the half-mixed batter. My reflection in the mixing bowl looked distorted, stretched thin like I felt most days. I had an appointment to keep my body functioning, but apparently that wasn't as important as basketball practice. I added the eggs one by one, my movements mechanical. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was making a cake to celebrate Margaret's birth, the day I had brought her into this world after 22 hours of labor, and she couldn't even acknowledge that I had needs too. As I poured the batter into the pan, I wondered when exactly I had become invisible. Was it gradual, like the gray creeping into my hair, or sudden, like when Harold's heart gave out on the golf course 5 years ago? Either way, here I was. Eleanor Barnes, mother, grandmother, chauffeur, babysitter, ATM, an occasional birthday baker. Everything to everyone, and somehow nothing to myself. The oven timer buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. I slid the cake in and set the timer. 45 minutes to consider how I was going to manage tomorrow's scheduling conflict. 45 minutes to decide if, just this once, I could put myself first. Little did I know that decision would change everything. The next morning, I called Dr. Winter's office as soon as they opened. The receptionist, Tina, had become something of a friend over the past months of my recovery. "Mrs. Barnes, we really can't reschedule again," Tina said, concern evident in her voice. "Dr. Winters was very specific about your case. Missing these appointments could set your recovery back significantly." "I understand," I said, though part of me had been hoping for an easy out. "It's just a difficult situation with my family." Tina was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor," she said, using my first name, which she rarely did, "may I speak candidly?" "Of course. I see this all the time with our older patients. They put everyone else's needs before their own, and then they wonder why their recovery takes twice as long." Her voice softened. "You deserve to take care of yourself, too." I felt something catch in my throat. When was the last time someone had reminded me that I deserved care? Harold would have. He'd always been my advocate, telling me to put on my own oxygen mask first, as he'd say. Since he'd been gone, I'd forgotten that lesson. "Thank you, Tina," I said. "I'll keep my appointment." After hanging up, I finished frosting Margaret's cake, carefully piping "Happy Birthday" in her favorite shade of purple. I boxed it up and set it on the counter, then picked up my phone to call Margaret back. She answered on the fourth ring, sounding harried. "Mom, I'm heading into a meeting. Can this wait? I just wanted to let you know that I can't reschedule my physical therapy appointment," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I'll need to keep it." There was a beat of silence. "Then are you serious right now? We talked about this yesterday. What am I supposed to do about Tyler? Perhaps Kyle could reschedule his meeting. Or maybe Emily could take the bus home and watch her brother until you get there," I suggested, naming my 16-year-old granddaughter. "Emily has debate club, and Kyle's meeting is with the regional VP. This isn't optional for us, Mom." "Neither is my health, Margaret," I said quietly. I heard her exhale sharply. "I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we do for you." "Everything they do for me?" I wanted to ask what exactly that was, but instead I said, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I've made the cake for your birthday dinner tonight. It's on the counter." "Fine," she said curtly. "I'll figure something out like I always do." The call ended, and I stood there, phone in hand, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. But beneath the anxiety, I felt something else stirring, a small spark of pride. For the first time in a long time, I had advocated for myself. As I gathered my purse and keys to head to the senior center for my morning water aerobics class, the one indulgence I allowed myself each week, I glanced at the framed family photo on my wall. Margaret, Kyle, and the kids at last year's Christmas. Everyone smiling. Everyone happy, everyone except me, whose smile didn't quite reach my eyes. "Family comes first," I whispered to the empty room. "But maybe, just maybe, I'm family too." The water aerobics class was in full swing by the time I arrived. I slipped into the pool, feeling the warm water ease the ache in my hip. Madeline, my regular swimming partner, waved from across the pool. "Eleanor, we missed you on Monday," she called out. "Grandma duty," I replied, making my way toward her through the water. Madeline, a spry 78-year-old with a no-nonsense attitude, rolled her eyes. "Again? Do those kids of yours ever handle their own children?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "They're busy with their careers. It's different these days." Busy, schmizy, Madeline scoffed. My daughter Patrice has 3 kids and a law practice, but she's never once expected me to rearrange my life to accommodate her schedule. The instructor called for our attention before I could respond, but Madeline's words stayed with me as we moved through the exercises. I thought about my own mother, how she'd worked full-time as a nurse, raised 3 children, and still managed to have a bridge club and volunteer at church. She'd helped with the grandchildren when she could, but it had been a joy, not an obligation, not a given. When had things changed? When had I become an extension of Margaret's household staff rather than a person with my own life? After class, Madeline and I sat in the community center cafe, sipping tea and watching the rain tap against the windows. "You seem distracted today," Madeline observed, stirring honey into her cup. I hesitated, then decided to confide in her. "I stood up to Margaret this morning, refused to cancel my physical therapy to pick up Tyler from basketball." Madeline's eyebrows shot up. Well, look who finally grew a backbone." "That's harsh," I said, though I couldn't help but smile at her bluntness. "It's honest," she countered. "Eleanor, I've known you for 3 years now? In that time, I've seen you cancel plans, rearrange doctor's appointments, and cut short our classes countless times because your daughter snapped her fingers." I started to defend Margaret, then stopped. Wasn't it true? Hadn't I just been thinking the same thing myself? "She's going to be angry," I said instead. Madeline shrugged. "Probably. People don't like it when the status quo changes, especially when it benefits them. But ask yourself this, what's the worst that could happen?" I'd been asking myself that very question all morning. "She could cut me off from the grandchildren," I said quietly, voicing my deepest fear. "They're everything to me, Madeline." Her face softened. "Oh, honey, if your relationship with your grandchildren depends on you being a doormat, then something is very wrong. Besides, do you really think Margaret would go that far?" I wanted to say no immediately, but something held me back. The cold tone in Margaret's voice this morning, the way she'd said after everything we do for you as if I was a burden rather than a support system, the subtle distance that had been growing between us over the past year, widening each time I expressed a need or preference that didn't align with hers. "I don't know," I admitted, "and that scares me." Madeline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Being a grandmother is a privilege, not a job, and it certainly shouldn't be a prison sentence. Remember that." As I drove home, Madeline's words echoed in my mind. A privilege, not a job. Had I been treating it like a job? Had I been so afraid of losing my place in their lives that I'd accepted terms no one should have to accept? The cake was still on the counter when I got home, pristine in its box. I had 2 hours before my physical therapy appointment, just enough time to shower, change, and maybe rest my hip a bit before heading out again. But first, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Margaret. No voicemails, but a text message. "Called the school. Tyler's taking the late bus. We'll talk tonight." The message was curt, but at least it meant she'd found a solution. I sent back a simple okay and headed for the shower, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. We would talk tonight at her birthday dinner. About what, exactly? My new boundaries, her expectations, I wasn't sure. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to have that conversation. Dr. Winters was pleased with my progress. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said as I moved through the exercises with less pain than last week. Your range of motion has improved significantly. I've been consistent with the home exercises, I told him, not mentioning that I often did them late at night after a full day of helping with Margaret's household. It shows, Mrs. Barnes, many patients your age struggle with recovery because they take on too much too soon. But you seem to have found a good balance. I almost laughed. Balance was the last word I would use to describe my life. But perhaps that was changing. Perhaps today was the first step toward finding that elusive equilibrium between caring for others and caring for myself. After my appointment, I stopped by the florist to pick up flowers for Margaret's birthday. Despite our tense conversation, she was still my daughter, and I still loved her. I selected a bouquet of purple calla lilies, her favorite since college. As I pulled into their driveway that evening, cake and flowers in tow, I took a deep breath. The house was lit up, warm and inviting from the outside. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. My family preparing for dinner, for celebration. I touched up my lipstick in the rearview mirror and practiced a smile. Everything would be fine. We would have a nice dinner, sing happy birthday, and maybe, just maybe, have a calm, adult conversation about boundaries and expectations. But as I reached for the door handle, a text message chimed on my phone. "Don't bother coming in. Left your cake in the garage fridge. We'll celebrate another time." I stared at the message from Margaret, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood. They were uninviting me to a dinner I had helped plan, for which I had baked the cake, and to which I had been looking forward all day, despite our disagreement. I sat in my car, the engine still running, as a cold feeling spread through my chest. Through the window, I could see them now, gathered around the dining table. Margaret, Kyle, Emily, and Tyler. My family, eating dinner without me, celebrating without me, because I had kept one appointment, because I had for once prioritized my health. The flowers suddenly felt heavy in my lap, a weight of expectation and tradition that had become one-sided. I placed them on the passenger seat, put the car in reverse, and backed out of the driveway. No one came to the window. No one came to the door. No one noticed I had been there at all. As I drove home in silence, tears blurring my vision, I realized Madeline had been wrong about one thing. I now knew exactly what the worst thing that could happen was, and it had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my recliner, the one Harold had given me for our 40th anniversary, and watched the shadows move across my living room as cars passed on the street outside. My phone remained silent. No apology, no explanation, just silence. By morning, the hurt had crystallized into something harder, something that sat like a stone in my chest. I made coffee, stronger than usual, and took it out to my small back porch. The air was crisp with early autumn, leaves just beginning to turn on the maple tree that dominated my yard. Harold had planted that tree the day we moved into this house, just after I'd announced I was pregnant with Margaret. For our daughter, he'd said, patting the trunk of the sapling that was barely taller than he was. By the time she's climbing it, it'll be strong enough to hold her. And it had been. Margaret had spent countless hours in that tree as a child, reading books on its lower branches, building imaginary worlds. Now it towered over the yard, sturdy and unwavering, unlike the relationship with the daughter it had been planted for. My coffee had gone cold by the time I made a decision. I went inside and picked up my phone, dialing Margaret's number. It was early, not yet 7, but I knew she would be up, preparing for her day, getting the kids ready for school. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped. "Mom, this isn't a good time." "I think we need to talk about last night," I said, keeping my voice steady. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice clear." "My choice?" I repeated, incredulous. "Margaret, I kept a doctor's appointment, a necessary one, and for that you excluded me from your birthday dinner, a dinner I helped plan and for which I baked your cake." "It wasn't just about the appointment, Mom," she said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "It was about the message you sent. That we, your family, aren't your priority anymore." The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. "And what message did you send by having dinner without me? By not even calling to tell me you'd decided to exclude me?" She sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "Look, I don't have time for this right now. Emily has a debate tournament, and Tyler needs to finish a science project. Can we talk about this later?" Later, always later. When it was convenient for her, when it fit into her schedule. Never mind my feelings, my time, my hurt. "Actually, no," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "This isn't something that can be postponed like one of my doctor's appointments. This is important, Margaret. Are you really going to make this into a bigger deal than it is?" she snapped. "So you missed one birthday dinner? It's not the end of the world." But it wasn't just one birthday dinner. It was a pattern, a symptom of a relationship that had turned dangerously one-sided. I took a deep breath. "I've decided to take a step back," I said carefully. "I need some time to think about what my role is in this family." There was a pause, then a short, disbelieving laugh. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I won't be available for babysitting or errands for a while. I need some space." "Space?" she echoed, as if the concept was foreign when applied to me. "Mom, we rely on you. The kids rely on you. You can't just decide to take space because you're in a mood." "A mood," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Is that what you think this is?" "I think you're overreacting to a simple scheduling conflict." I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly very tired. "This isn't about the scheduling conflict, Margaret. This is about respect, mutual respect. And right now, I don't feel that our relationship has that." "So what, you're punishing us? Punishing the kids because you're upset with me?" Her voice had risen, taking on that accusatory tone that always made me back down in the past. "Not this time. I'm not punishing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference." "Well, your boundary is going to cause real problems for us. Kyle has a business trip next week, and I have 3 back-to-back client meetings on Thursday. We were counting on you to pick up the kids and stay with them until I get home." Of course they were. They always counted on me, without asking, without consideration for my own schedule or needs. It was assumed, expected, demanded. "You'll need to make other arrangements," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Unbelievable," Margaret muttered. "Just unbelievable." The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in my kitchen, phone in hand, heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd stood my ground, and it felt both terrifying and strangely liberating. I put the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the maple tree again. It had weathered storms, drought, and disease over the years, but it still stood tall, still offered shade and beauty. Perhaps I could be like that tree, rooted, resilient, and worthy of respect. As the day wore on, I waited for Margaret to call back, to apologize, to try to understand. The the call never came. Instead, around noon, I received a text from Emily. "Grandma, are you mad at us? Mom said you don't want to see us anymore." My heart sank. So that was how Margaret was framing this to the children, not as a boundary or a need for mutual respect, but as abandonment, as rejection. I typed back quickly, "Of course not, sweetheart. I love you and Tyler very much. I'm just taking some time for myself right now. We'll see each other soon." Emily's response came a few minutes later. "Okay, I hope you feel better." Feel better? As if I was sick. As if setting a boundary was a temporary affliction that would pass with time and then everything could go back to normal. But I didn't want things to go back to normal. Normal wasn't working for me anymore. Normal was exhausting, demeaning, and lonely in its own way, despite being surrounded by family. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, something I rarely had time to do properly with all my grandparenting duties, my doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a package delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I found Kyle standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable in his business suit, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Kyle," I said, genuinely surprised. In all the years since he and Margaret had married, he had never once come to my house alone. "Eleanor," he nodded, formal as always. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." I stepped back, allowing him into the foyer. He didn't remove his shoes or his jacket, a clear sign this wasn't meant to be a long or comfortable visit. "Margaret is upset," he began without preamble, standing awkwardly in my living room. "She says you're refusing to help with the children anymore." "That's not exactly what I said," I replied, gesturing for him to sit down. He remained standing. "I said I needed some time and space to reassess my role in the family." Kyle frowned, looking every bit the corporate executive he was, analyzing a problem to be solved. "I don't understand what that means in practical terms." "It means I won't be available for babysitting or errands for a while," I explained, echoing what I'd told Margaret that morning. "I need some time to take care of myself." "I see." He shifted the portfolio from one arm to the other. "And how long do you anticipate this break lasting?" The way he said break made it sound like I was taking a vacation rather than establishing necessary boundaries. I felt a flicker of irritation. "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "That depends on a number of factors, such as whether Margaret and I can have an honest conversation about expectations and mutual respect." Kyle's expression remained impassive. "Eleanor, you have to understand our position. We have demanding careers and 2 active children. We rely on your support." "I understand that," I said, "but my support should be appreciated, not expected, not demanded, and certainly not taken for granted." He sighed, glancing at his watch. "What exactly do you want, Eleanor? An apology? More thank yous? A financial arrangement?" The suggestion that this was about money stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "What I want is to be treated like a person, Kyle. A person with my own needs, my own life, and my own value outside of what I can do for your family." "No one is saying you don't have value," he said, sounding exasperated. "No one is saying I do, either," I countered. "Actions speak louder than words, and the actions lately have been very clear. I'm useful until I'm not, and then I'm disposable." Kyle's jaw tightened. "That's a very dramatic interpretation." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "You excluded me from Margaret's birthday dinner, a dinner I helped plan and for which I baked the cake, because I kept a doctor's appointment instead of picking up Tyler from basketball. How would you interpret that? He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. That was Margaret's decision, not mine. And did you object? Did you point out how hurtful and disproportionate that response was? His silence was answer enough. I thought not, I said. Kyle cleared his throat, clearly ready to move past this uncomfortable topic. The practical matter remains. We have commitments next week that can't be changed. We need someone to watch the children. There are after-school programs, I suggested. Babysitters, neighbors, friends' parents. The same options available to every other working family that doesn't have a grandmother living nearby. Those options cost money, Eleanor. I almost laughed. And my time doesn't. My health doesn't. My self-respect doesn't. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in our entire conversation. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of, was it understanding, or just the realization that this wouldn't be as easily resolved as he'd hoped? I'll talk to Margaret, he said finally, but I hope you'll reconsider. The children miss you already. It had been less than a day, but I didn't point that out. Instead, I simply nodded. I miss them too, but this isn't about them, Kyle. This is about setting a healthy precedent for how I deserve to be treated. What kind of example would I be setting for Emily and Tyler if I continued to allow myself to be taken for granted? He didn't have an answer for that. With a nod and a brief, awkward goodbye, he left his car pulling away from the curb with a little more speed than necessary. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling drained but oddly empowered. 2 conversations, 2 boundaries held. It was a start. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister, Beth, who lived in Arizona. We drifted apart after Harold died, not out of any conflict, but simply because my life had become so consumed with Margaret and her family that I'd had little time or energy for other relationships. Eleanor? Beth sounded surprised but pleased. Is everything okay? Not really, I admitted, and then the whole story came pouring out. The years of increasing demands, the birthday dinner exclusion, the conversations with Margaret and Kyle. Beth listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy or outrage at all the right moments. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Oh, Ellie, I've been worried about this for years." "You have?" "Of course. Every time we talked, it was always about what you were doing for Margaret and her family, never about you, your interests, your needs. It wasn't healthy, but I didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like I was criticizing your choices. I'm not sure they were choices so much as a slow slide into a role I never meant to accept," I said, the realization dawning on me as I spoke. "It happens that way sometimes," Beth said gently, "especially to women our age. We were raised to put everyone else first, to find our worth and how much we could give and do for others. But that doesn't mean it's right or healthy. I just don't know what happens next," I confessed. "What if Margaret really does cut me off from the grandchildren? What if this permanently damages our relationship?" "Then that's Margaret's choice and Margaret's loss," Beth said firmly. "But Ellie, think about what kind of relationship you had before. Was it really one worth preserving in its current form?" I hadn't thought of it that way. Had I been so afraid of losing what I had that I hadn't stopped to evaluate whether what I had was worth having? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Well, maybe that's what this time is for, to figure that out." Beth paused, then added, Jim and I have that spare bedroom that's just sitting empty. If you wanted a change of scenery while you sort things out, you're always welcome here." The offer touched me deeply. "Thank you, Beth. I might take you up on that someday." After we hung up, I sat with my thoughts for a while. Beth's perspective had been eye-opening. Had I really been so consumed by my role in Margaret's family that I'd lost sight of everything else? My own interests, my own friendships, my own needs? I thought about Harold then, what he would say if he could see me now. He'd always been protective of my time and energy, often running interference when Margaret's demands became too much. "Eleanor," he'd say, "you're not the family's personal assistant. You're their mother and grandmother. There's a difference." After he died, those boundaries had eroded quickly. Margaret's requests had become more frequent, more demanding, and I'd been too grief-stricken and afraid of further loss to push back. Now, 5 years later, I was facing the consequences of that passive acceptance. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision. This time, apart from Margaret and her family, wouldn't just be about making a point or teaching them to value me more. It would be about rediscovering who I was outside of my role as grandmother and mother, about rebuilding the parts of myself that had been neglected for too long. Tomorrow, I decided I would start with small steps. Perhaps I'd call Madeline and see if he wanted to have lunch after water aerobics. Or maybe I'd visit that art supply store I'd been driving past for years, always too busy with grandchildren to stop in. Harold had always said I had a talent for watercolors. Perhaps it was time to find out if he was right. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep looking forward to the next day, the possibilities it held for me. Just me, Eleanor Barnes. The week that followed was both liberating and disorienting. Without the constant demands of Margaret's family, I suddenly had time, vast expanses of it that stretched before me like uncharted territory. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I cleaned my house thoroughly, rearranged the living room furniture, and sorted through old photographs. But these tasks filled only a fraction of the hours that had previously been consumed by babysitting, chauffeuring, and running errands for Margaret. By Wednesday, I decided it was time to venture further outside my comfort zone. I drove to the community center and signed up for a watercolor class that met twice a week. The instructor, a bohemian woman in her 60s named Joy, clapped her hands in delight when I told her I was a complete beginner. "Oh, how wonderful," she exclaimed. "A blank canvas, both literally and figuratively." The other students were a mix of ages, from a college student to a man who must have been in his 90s, his hands gnarled with arthritis but still capable of producing delicate, translucent washes of color. No one asked me about my grandchildren or my daughter. No one expected me to be anything other than Eleanor, the watercolor novice with the tentative smile. It was refreshing, invigorating even. On Thursday, the day Margaret had said she had those important client meetings, I deliberately kept myself busy. I attended my watercolor class in the morning, had lunch with Madeline afterward, and then spent the afternoon browsing through a used bookstore I'd discovered near the community center. By evening, I was pleasantly tired, my mind full of new experiences rather than worries about whether Margaret had found alternative childcare arrangements. My phone remained mostly silent. Emily texted once to tell me about her debate tournament. They'd placed second, and I responded with enthusiasm and love. But from Margaret, there was nothing. Not a word, not a text, not even a passive-aggressive email. Just silence. Part of me was hurt by this. A larger part was relieved. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, another justification of my boundaries. I needed this time to remember who I was when I wasn't being defined by my usefulness to others. On Friday evening, as I was preparing a proper dinner for myself, salmon with roasted vegetables, something I rarely had time to make when I was always rushing to or from Margaret's house, my doorbell rang. My heart jumped, instantly on alert. Was it Margaret? Kyle? One of the children? But when I opened the door, I found Madeline standing there, dressed in a vibrant blue tunic and white pants, her silver hair styled in a way I'd never seen before. "Get dressed," she announced without preamble. "We're going out." "Out?" I repeated, confused. "Out where?" "To the new jazz club downtown. My nephew's band is playing and I have 2 tickets. She looked me up and down, taking in my comfortable but decidedly homebound attire. "Something nicer than that, if you have it." "Madeline, I don't know. I haven't been to a club in decades." "All the more reason to go now," she insisted, practically pushing past me into the house. "Come on, Eleanor. When was the last time you did something just for fun? Something that had nothing to do with being a mother or a grandmother?" I couldn't remember. That realization decided it for me. "Give me 15 minutes, I said. 20 minutes later, dressed in black pants and a silky purple blouse I'd bought years ago but never worn, I was sitting in Madeline's car as she navigated through Friday evening traffic toward downtown. The jazz club was housed in a renovated warehouse, string lights crisscrossing the ceiling, small tables clustered around a modest stage. Madeline's nephew's band was already playing when we arrived, the smooth notes of a saxophone weaving through the conversations and laughter of the patrons. We found a table near the back and Madeline immediately ordered a bottle of wine for us to share. I started to protest. I rarely drank more than an occasional glass, but she waved me off. "Live a little, Eleanor," she said, pouring me a generous glass. "The world won't end if you have an extra glass of wine on a Friday night." And so I did. I sipped wine, tapped my foot to the music, and let myself be present in a moment that was entirely about pleasure, about joy, about being alive in my 73-year-old body that could still appreciate the wail of a saxophone and the warmth of good wine. As the evening progressed, Madeline introduced me to her nephew, a kind-eyed man in his 40s who played the drums with surprising delicacy. She also, to my initial horror and eventual amusement, engaged us in conversation with the occupants of the neighboring table, a group of middle-aged professionals unwinding after their work week. "My friend Eleanor here," Madeline announced to them, "is in the middle of a personal renaissance. She's discovering who she is outside of her family roles." I felt my cheeks flush, but strangely, I didn't mind the introduction. There was something freeing about being defined by my current journey rather than by whose mother or grandmother I was. One of the women at the table, a stylish woman with cropped silver hair, raised her glass to me. "To renaissances," she said. "They can happen at any age." I raised my glass in return, feeling a connection with this stranger that transcended the usual small talk. "To renaissances," I echoed. By the time Madeline drove me home, it was nearly midnight, later than I'd been out in years. My feet hurt from tapping along to the music, and my cheeks ached from smiling. But it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from pleasure rather than obligation. "Thank you," I told Madeline as she pulled up in front of my house. "I needed that more than I realized." "You're welcome," she said, patting my hand. "And this is just the beginning, Eleanor. There's a whole world out there that doesn't revolve around your daughter's schedule. As I let myself into my quiet house, I thought about Madeline's words. A whole world. It had been there all along, of course, but I'd made myself too busy, too essential to Margaret's family, to notice it. Now, standing in my foyer with the memory of jazz still vibrating in my bones, I wondered what else I had been missing. I slept deeply that night, without dreams, without worry, without the underlying anxiety that had become so familiar. I'd stopped noticing it was there. On Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone chiming with a text message. I reached for it, blinking sleep from my eyes, and saw Margaret's name on the screen. The kids have a half day on Monday. Their after-school program is closed. I need you to pick them up at noon. Not, would you mind? Or if you're available, or even please. Just, I need you to. As if nothing had changed. As if our conversations, my boundaries, my week of rediscovery had never happened. I set the phone down without responding and went to make coffee. As the rich aroma filled my kitchen, I thought about my options. I could ignore the text completely. I could respond with a firm no. I could suggest alternative arrangements. Or I could acquiesce, slip back into my old role, and pretend this week of self-discovery had been nothing but a temporary rebellion. The Eleanor of a week ago would have chosen the last option without hesitation, but I wasn't that Eleanor anymore. I picked up the phone and typed, "I'm not available on Monday. Perhaps Emily could come here after school if she'd like to spend time together." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Emily was 16, old enough to take the bus to my house if she wanted to see me, old enough to have a relationship with me that wasn't controlled by her mother. Margaret's response came almost immediately. "This isn't about spending time together. This is about childcare. Tyler can't be alone." I took a sip of my coffee, considering my next words carefully. I understand, but as I told you, I'm not available for childcare right now. I'm happy to see the children as their grandmother, not as their babysitter. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Mom, this is ridiculous. We need you." Need. That word again. But need for what? For me, Eleanor Barnes, the woman with interests and feelings and a life of her own? Or for what I could provide, free childcare, errands run, meals cooked? "I'm sorry you're in a difficult position," I replied, "but my decision stands." This time, there was no immediate response. I finished my coffee, made some toast, and was just choosing whether to attend the farmer's market I'd always been too busy to visit when my phone rang. Margaret. I took a deep breath and answered, "Good morning, Margaret." "What exactly are you trying to prove?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. "That we rely on you. We know that. That we need you. We've never denied it." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said calmly. "I'm establishing boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Since when do families need boundaries? Family helps family. That's how it works." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "But help should be reciprocal, Margaret. It should be appreciated, not expected as a right. And it certainly shouldn't come at the expense of the helper's own well-being." "So what, you want to meddle every time you watch your own grandchildren? A thank you note when you pick them up from school?" "Basic courtesy would be a start," I said, keeping my voice level despite the hurt her words caused. "Respect for my time, my health, my life outside of your family would be even better." She made a sound of frustration. "Mom, we're not having this conversation again. I need to know if you're going to pick up the kids on Monday or not. I've already answered that question. No, I'm not. Fine, she snapped. Then don't expect to see them at all. The threat hung in the air between us, heavy and painful. This was exactly what I had feared, that setting boundaries would lead to being cut off from my grandchildren. But somewhere in the past week, I had found a well of strength I hadn't known I possessed. That would be very sad for everyone involved, I said quietly, especially the children. But if that's your decision, I'll respect it. My decision? You're the one who started this. No, Margaret. This started long before I set a boundary. It started when our relationship became one-sided, when my value became measured only by what I could do for you and your family. That's not true, she protested, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day? My health? My interests? When was the last time you invited me over for dinner that wasn't also a babysitting request? She was silent, and I could almost see her mentally scanning through our recent interactions, searching for evidence to counter my claims. I love you, Margaret, I continued, my voice softening, and I love Emily and Tyler more than I can express, but I need to love myself too. I need to remember who I am outside of what I can do for all of you. So what does this mean? She asked, and for the first time, I heard something other than anger or defensiveness in her voice. Something almost like confusion, or perhaps even hurt. You don't want to be part of our lives anymore. Of course I do, I assured her, but on different terms. I want to be your mother and their grandmother, not your employee, not your backup plan, not your safety net, just your family with all the mutual respect and love that should entail. There was a long pause. I heard her exhale slowly. I have to go, she said finally. I need to figure out what to do about Monday. I understand, I said, and I did. She had practical concerns, immediate needs that my boundary had complicated. That wasn't my responsibility to solve, but I could acknowledge the challenge. I'll talk to you later, she added, and then the call ended. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. It hadn't been an easy conversation, but it had been necessary, and unlike our previous exchanges, this one had ended not with a door slamming, but with a window left slightly ajar. I'll talk to you later. It wasn't much, but it was something. That afternoon, I did go to the farmer's market. I wandered among the stalls, admiring the fall produce, the handmade crafts, the artisanal bread. I bought a small pot of local honey, a bunch of fresh flowers, and a hand-woven scarf in shades of blue and green that reminded me of the watercolors I was learning to mix in my class. As I was examining a display of homemade jams, a voice beside me said, "The blackberry is excellent. I have it on toast every morning." I turned to find an older gentleman with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard smiling at me. He was tall, dressed in a plaid shirt and corduroy pants, looking every bit the retired professor. "Thank you for the recommendation," I said, picking up the blackberry jam. "I do love blackberries." "Walter Jenkins," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Eleanor Barnes," I replied, shaking it. "First time at the market?" he asked. "I don't recall seeing you here before, and I'm something of a regular." "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. "Yes, it's my first visit. I've always been too busy with other commitments." "Well, you've chosen a good day. Evelyn's bread stall is here today, and her sourdough is the best in the county." He pointed toward a booth at the far end of the market, and before I knew it, we were warring in that direction together. Walter pointing out his favorite vendors and products along the way. He was easy to talk to, with no expectations, no demands, just the simple pleasure of conversation between two adults. We ended up sharing a bench outside the market, each with a cup of coffee from a local roaster and a piece of Evelyn's famous sourdough, which was indeed exceptional. Walter told me about his career as a high school English teacher, now retired, and his passion for gardening. I shared a little about my recent watercolor classes and my rediscovery of jazz music. Neither of us mentioned children or grandchildren, not because they weren't important, but because they weren't the only things that defined us. It was refreshing, this connection based solely on who we were in the moment, not on our family roles or past accomplishments. As we parted ways, Walter hesitated, then said, "There's a poetry reading at the bookstore on Oak Street next Friday evening. Nothing fancy, just local writers sharing their work. If you're interested, perhaps we could meet there?" I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that I recognized belatedly as the beginning of attraction. Not romantic necessarily, but the simple pleasure of finding someone whose company you enjoy and who might enjoy yours in return. "I'd like that," I said, and we exchanged phone numbers before saying goodbye. As I drove home, I realized I was smiling. The day had brought unexpected joys, the vibrant colors and scents of the market, the discovery of Evelyn's bread, and the meeting with Walter. None of these experiences would have been possible if I'd been spending my Saturday as I usually did, watching Tyler while Margaret and Kyle ran errands or attended to their own interests. The realization wasn't bitter, just factual. Every choice had consequences, both positive and negative. I had chosen for years to prioritize Margaret's family's needs over my own, and I had missed countless small pleasures as a result. Now I was choosing differently, and while that choice had brought conflict and uncertainty with Margaret, it had also opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Back home, I arranged the fresh flowers in a vase, placed the blackberry jam in my cupboard, draped the new scarf over the back of my reading chair. Small treasures, simple pleasures, but mine, chosen by me. That evening, as I was preparing for bed, my phone chimed with a text message. I expected it to be from Margaret, perhaps with more arguments about Monday, but instead it was from Emily. "Grandma, can I come over tomorrow? There's a book I want to show you." My heart lifted. Whatever Margaret had decided about my role in their lives, Emily was reaching out on her own. At 16, she was asserting her own desires, her own relationship with me separate from her mother's feelings. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied. "I'd love to see you. Come for lunch?" "Perfect. I'll take the bus. See you at noon." I went to bed that night with a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring Emily, with her bright eyes and curious mind. It would be a chance to connect with my granddaughter, not as a caretaker, but simply as the person who loved her for who she was becoming. In the morning, I prepared a simple lunch: sandwiches, a fruit salad, and some of Evelyn's sourdough bread with the blackberry jam Walter had recommended. I set the table with care, using the good plates that usually stayed in the cabinet, and placed a small vase of flowers as a centerpiece. Emily arrived precisely at noon, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a book clutched in her other hand. She looked older somehow, more composed, her long dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her jeans and sweater stylish but understated. "Grandma, she said, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of vanilla and something fruity, her shampoo perhaps. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too, sweetheart," I replied, holding her close for a moment before stepping back. Come in, come in. Lunch is ready." We settled at the dining table, and I noticed Emily taking in the nice plates, the flowers, the carefully prepared food. "This is fancy," she commented. "Special occasion?" "You're here," I said simply. "That's special enough." She smiled, a quick flash of teeth, then ducked her head as if embarrassed by the sentiment. "Thanks," she murmured. As we ate, Emily told me about school, her debate team's recent victory, the essay she was writing for AP English, the drama in her friend group. I listened attentively, asking questions that showed I was engaged, remembering details she'd shared in previous conversations. "So what's this book you wanted to show me?" I asked as we finished our sandwiches. Emily reached for her backpack and pulled out a well-worn paperback. "We're reading this in English, and I remembered you talking about it once. Said it was one of your favorites." I took the book from her, a lump forming in my throat as I recognized the cover. "To Kill a Mockingbird," I said softly. "Yes, I've always loved it." I thought maybe she hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I thought maybe we could read it together? Like discuss it. Miss Patterson says I have good insights, but I'd like to hear what you think too." The request touched me deeply. Here was my granddaughter seeking not my childcare services or my cooking or my financial assistance, but my thoughts, my perspective, my company. "I would love that, Emily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Truly." She beamed, and in that moment, she looked so much like Margaret had at her age, eager, bright, full of potential. It made my heart ache with both love and nostalgia. We spent the afternoon discussing the first few chapters of the book, sitting side by side on the couch, passing the volume back and forth to point out particular passages. Emily's insights were indeed thoughtful, showing a maturity beyond her years. I shared my own perspectives, shaped by having read the book in different decades of my life, seeing it through the lens of different historical contexts. Time slipped away, and before I knew it, the afternoon light was fading. Emily glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably go. Mom's expecting me back for dinner." "Of course," I said, though I was reluctant to see her leave. "This has been wonderful, Emily. Thank you for suggesting it." She hesitated, fiddling with the strap of her backpack. "Mom's still upset, she said finally, "about you not helping with Tyler." I nodded, unsurprised. "I know." "She says you're being selfish." Emily's eyes met mine, searching. "But I don't think that's it. I think maybe you just needed some space, some time for yourself." Her perceptiveness didn't surprise me. Emily had always been observant, sensitive to the emotional currents around her. "That's part of it," I acknowledged. "But it's also about respect, Emily, about being valued for who I am, not just for what I can do for your family." She nodded slowly. "I get that. It's like when my friends only text me when they need help with homework, not because they actually want to hang out. It feels crappy." "Yes," I said, smiling at her apt comparison. "It feels crappy indeed." "For what it's worth," she added, slinging her backpack over her shoulder, "I value you for you, Grandma. Not just because you make the best chocolate chip cookies or help me with history projects." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." I walked her to the door, and she paused before leaving. "Can we do this again? Maybe next weekend?" I'd like nothing better, I assured her. After she left, I cleared the lunch dishes with a lighter heart than I'd had in days. Emily undulated, at least somewhat, and she wanted to maintain our relationship, independent of her mother's feelings or the practical support I had withdrawn. It was a victory, small but significant. The rest of Sunday passed quietly. I worked on a watercolor painting for my class, experimenting with the techniques Joy had taught us. I called Beth and told her about my day with Emily, about the farmer's market, about Walter and the poetry reading. She expressed delight at every new development, her enthusiasm genuine and infectious. "You sound different, Ellie," she said toward the end of our call. "More present, more alive." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've been sleepwalking for years and I'm finally waking up." "Good," Beth said firmly. "It's about time." Monday came and I deliberately kept myself occupied, knowing that this was the day Margaret had wanted me to take up the children. I attended a morning yoga class at the community center, something I'd been curious about but had never found the time to try. It was gentle, designed for seniors, and though I felt awkward and inflexible compared to some of the other participants, the instructor was kind and encouraging. "Your body remembers what it feels like to move with joy," she told us as we finished the class. "Sometimes it just needs a reminder." Afterward, I browsed a small art supply store, purchasing a set of higher quality watercolor paints than the student grade I'd been using. The expense felt both indulgent and necessary, an investment in my new interest, a commitment to continuing this exploration. I was just leaving the store when my phone rang. Margaret again. I braced myself as I answered. "Hello, Margaret." "Mom," she said, her voice strained. "I need a favor." I almost laughed at the irony. After our conversations, after my clear boundaries, her first words were still about what she needed from me. "What kind of favor?" I asked neutrally. "I had to take the day off work to stay with Tyler, since you wouldn't," she began, a note of accusation in her voice. "But now Emily's debate coach just called. There's an emergency team meeting this afternoon to prepare for the state competition. She really can't miss it." "And?" I prompted, though I could guess what was coming. "And I can't be in two places at once. I need you to either pick up Emily from school and take her to the meeting, or stay with Tyler while I do it." I considered her request. On the one hand, I had drawn a clear line about not being available for childcare on demand. On the other, this seemed like a genuine emergency, not just a convenience issue, and I did want to support Emily's debate participation. It was something she was passionate about and excelled in. "I'll pick up Emily and take her to her meeting," I said finally. "But Margaret, this is a one-time emergency assistance, not a return to the previous arrangement." "Fine," she said tightly. "Whatever you need to tell yourself, she needs to be at the school by 3:30. The meeting should be done by 5. I'll be there." "Thank you," she added, almost as an afterthought, before hanging up. It wasn't much, a grudging thanks offered more out of social convention than genuine appreciation, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd received in quite some time. Small steps, I reminded myself. Rome wasn't built in a day, and years of established patterns wouldn't change overnight. I picked up Emily from school as arranged, and her face lit up when she saw me waiting in the car line. "Grandma, I didn't know you were picking me up." "Your mom called," I explained as she slid into the passenger seat. "Something about an emergency debate meeting?" "Yes." Emily's eyes were bright with excitement. "Coach thinks we have a real shot at the state championship this year. We're strategizing for the preliminary rounds." As we drove to the school, Emily chattered about debate techniques, logical fallacies, and the strengths and weaknesses of their main competitors. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself asking questions, genuinely interested in this world that meant so much to her. "You should come watch sometime," she suggested as we pulled into the school parking lot. "The regional competition is in 2 weeks. It's open to the public." "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "Just let me know when and where." She grinned, gathering her materials. "I will. And Grandma, thanks for the ride. I know things are complicated right now with Mom." "They are," I acknowledged, "but that doesn't change how much I love you and want to support your interests." She leaned over and gave me a quick hug before hopping out of the car. "See you at." I watched her jog toward the school building, her ponytail bouncing, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. In that moment, I felt a surge of love so powerful it took my breath away. This connection, this genuine relationship, was what I had been afraid of losing when I set my boundaries with Margaret. But perhaps I had underestimated the bonds I had formed with my grandchildren. Perhaps those connections were stronger and more independent than I had realized. I decided to wait at the small cafe across from the school rather than driving home and back again. It was a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I ordered a chai latte and settled into a comfortable armchair by the window, pulling out the novel I'd brought with me, a mystery Beth had recommended months ago that I was only now finding time to read. I was deep into the story, the tea long finished, when a shadow fell across my page. I looked up to find Kyle standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable in his business suit. "Eleanor," he nodded, "may I join you?" "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite mine, "though I'm surprised to see you here." He sat down, setting his briefcase beside the chair. "I had a meeting nearby and saw your car in the parking lot." He paused. "Margaret mentioned you were helping with Emily today." "Yes, taking her to her debate meeting." Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate that." "She's my granddaughter," I said simply. "I want to support her passions." He was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "You know," he said finally, "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about value and respect." "Oh?" I marked my place in the book and set it aside, giving him my full attention. "I realize I may have been dismissive." The admission seemed difficult for him. "The truth is, we do rely on you heavily, perhaps too heavily." This was unexpected. Kyle had always been the pragmatist in their household, focused on logistics and practicalities rather than emotional nuances. To hear him acknowledging the imbalance in our relationship was surprising, to say the least. "Yes," I said carefully, "you do. Margaret is struggling with this change," he continued. "She sees it as rejection, as abandonment." "It's neither," I assured him. "It's simply a necessary rebalancing." "I understand that, I think. But Margaret," he trailed off, then tried again. "Margaret lost her father 5 years ago. I think she's afraid of losing you too, even though she'd never admit it." The observation struck me with its insight. I hadn't considered that my boundary setting might have triggered Margaret's unresolved grief over Harold's death. It didn't excuse her behavior or diminish my need for boundaries, but it did offer a new lens through which to view her reactions. "Thank you for sharing that perspective," I said. "It's helpful to understand where she might be coming from." Kyle checked his watch and stood. "I should go. I just wanted to. Well, to say thank you for today, for being there for Emily despite everything. As he turned to leave, I called after him, Kyle, would you and Margaret consider coming to dinner at my house this weekend? Just the adults to talk things through in a calm setting? He looked surprised by the invitation, then thoughtful. I'll discuss it with Margaret, he promised. And I'll try to help her see your perspective. After he left, I sat with my book open but unread in my lap, turning over this unexpected interaction in my mind. Kyle, of all people, offering insight into Margaret's emotional state. Kyle acknowledging the imbalance in our relationship. It was a small crack in the unified front they had presented, a small opening for understanding and perhaps eventually change. By the time Emily emerged from her meeting, I had finished 2 more chapters of my novel and come to tentative peace with the complexity of the situation. This wasn't a simple matter of right and wrong, of villains and victims. It was a family in transition, navigating new boundaries, new understandings, new ways of relating to one another. It would take time, patience, and probably more difficult conversations. But perhaps, just perhaps, we could find our way to a healthier, more balanced relationship.
How was the meeting? I asked as Emily slid into the passenger seat, her cheeks flushed with excitement.
Amazing! Coach thinks I should deliver the closing argument at regionals. It's a huge responsibility. That's wonderful, Emily. I'm so proud of you. As I drove her home, I thought about the many facets of pride. I was proud of Emily, yes, for her intelligence, her dedication, her growing maturity. But I was also, I realized, proud of myself for setting boundaries that needed to be set, for weathering the storm that followed, for beginning to reclaim parts of myself that had been neglected for too long. It wasn't a finished journey, not by any means. There would be missteps and backsliding, moments of doubt and moments of conflict, but I had taken the first hardest steps, and whatever happened next, I would face it not as Margaret's ever-available mother or as the family's reliable fallback, but as Eleanor Barnes, a woman with her own value, her own needs, and her own life worth living. The invitation to dinner hung in the air all week. Kyle had texted on Tuesday to say they were considering it, but by Thursday, I still hadn't received a definitive answer. I tried not to let the uncertainty consume me, focusing instead on my growing roster of activities. Watercolor class, a book club, Madeline had invited me to join, and my daily walks through the neighborhood, which were becoming longer and more exploratory as my hip continued to strengthen. On Friday afternoon, as I was getting ready for the poetry reading with Walter, my phone chimed with a text from Margaret. We'll come for dinner tomorrow. 6 p.m. Kyle's bringing wine. No pleasantries. No acknowledgement of the olive branch I was extending, but an acceptance nonetheless. I texted back a simple looking forward to it and returned to the task of selecting an outfit for the evening. I settled on black pants and a teal blouse that brought out the blue in my eyes, with a silver pendant Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary. As I fastened the clasp, I thought of him, of how he would have encouraged this evening out, this new friendship. Live, Eleanor, he'd always said in the months before his heart failed him. Don't just exist. The poetry reading was held in the back room of a charming independent bookstore, chairs arranged in a semicircle around a small podium. Walter was waiting near the entrance, a book of poetry in his hands, his eyes crinkling in a smile when he spotted me. Eleanor, he greeted me warmly. I'm so glad you could come. Thank you for the invitation, I replied, suddenly feeling a bit shy, like a teenager on a first date rather than a 73-year-old widow. We found seats near the middle of the room, and as the lights dimmed, Walter leaned closer to explain the format of the evening. Local poets reading their own work, followed by an open mic for anyone brave enough to share, he whispered. The talent varies, but the passion is always genuine. The readings were indeed a mixed bag, some deeply moving, others earnestly amateur, but there was something beautiful about the diversity of voices, the courage it took for each person to stand at that podium and offer their words to the room. I found myself thoroughly engaged, occasionally exchanging glances with Walter when a particularly powerful line was read, or when a poet's delivery was especially heartfelt. During the intermission, we stepped outside for some fresh air, walking slowly along the sidewalk in front of the bookstore. "What did you think?" Walter asked. "I'm enjoying it immensely," I said honestly. There's something so intimate about hearing poetry read by the person who wrote it. It's like being invited into their innermost thoughts. He nodded, looking pleased. That's exactly it. It's one of the most authentic forms of expression, I think. We talked about favorite poets, about the power of words, about the way certain lines could capture feelings that seemed otherwise inexpressible. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years, intellectual meandering, with no practical purpose other than the pleasure of exchange. As we turned to head back into the bookstore, Walter hesitated, then said, "I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to have dinner after the reading? There's a little Italian place just down the block that stays open late." I felt a flutter of both excitement and anxiety. Dinner would make this a proper, what? Date? Outing? Either way, it would extend the evening, deepen the connection we were forming. Was I ready for that? The Eleanor of a month ago would have immediately thought of excuses. Grandchildren to check on, Margaret's needs to attend to. But that Eleanor was receding, making room for a new version of myself who could say yes to unexpected invitations, who could prioritize her own experiences. "I'd like that very much," I said. The second half of the poetry reading seemed to fly by, and before I knew it, Walter and I were seated at a small table in a cozy Italian restaurant, sharing a bottle of Chianti and a plate of bruschetta. "So, Eleanor Barnes," Walter said, raising his glass in a small toast, "tell me more about this renaissance of yours." I laughed, surprised. "How did you know about that?" "Your friend Madeline mentioned it when she introduced you at the jazz club last week. I was at the next table over, though you probably didn't notice me." "You were there?" I tried to recall the faces at the neighboring table but couldn't place him. "Just briefly. I'd stopped in to hear my nephew's band. He's the saxophonist, but I had another commitment that evening. I heard Madeline's introduction, though, and I remember thinking, now there's a woman with a story." I took a sip of wine, considering how much to share. "It's a bit complicated," I admitted, "but the short version is that I'm learning to prioritize my own needs after years of putting everyone else first." "Ah," Walter nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The classic dilemma of our generation, especially for women. Expected to be the caretakers, the supporters, the ones who hold everything together, often at the expense of our own dreams and needs." "Exactly," I said, grateful for his immediate comprehension. "It's been challenging. My daughter isn't taking it well." "Children rarely do when the established order changes," he observed. "My son went through a similar adjustment when I decided to travel after my wife passed. He'd gotten used to me being available whenever he needed a hand with the house or the kids. The idea that I might have my own plans was something of a revelation to him." "How did you work through it?" I asked, genuinely curious. Walter smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. Time, consistency, and a fair amount of difficult conversations. Eventually, he came to see me as a person in my own right, not just as Dad, the reliable backup. That's what I'm hoping for, I said. We're having dinner tomorrow night, my daughter and her husband, a chance to talk things through. Brave, he commented, but necessary. The conversation flowed easily from there, touching on books we'd read, places we'd traveled, the joys and challenges of aging in a society that often seemed to value youth above all else. Walter was thoughtful, articulate, and refreshingly direct. He listened when I spoke, really listened, his attention focused and genuine. By the time we finished our meal, shared tiramisu and all, it was nearly 11, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd stayed out so late or enjoyed an evening so thoroughly. Walter insisted on walking me to my car, though his own was parked in the opposite direction. As we reached my vehicle, he hesitated, then said, "I've enjoyed this evening tremendously, Eleanor. I hope we can do it again sometime." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. "Perhaps a proper dinner next week? There's a new farm-to-table restaurant I've been wanting to try." "That sounds lovely." He smiled, his eyes crinkling in that now familiar way. "Good, it's a date." A date. The word hung between us, both thrilling and slightly terrifying. I hadn't been on a date since before Harold, hadn't even considered the possibility of another relationship, but here I was, at 73, feeling the gentle stirrings of connection with this kind, intelligent man. As I drove home, I found myself humming along to the radio, a sense of lightness pervading my body despite the late hour. Life was unfolding in unexpected ways, opening doors I had thought permanently closed. Tomorrow would bring the challenging dinner with Margaret and Kyle, but tonight was for savoring the simple joy of new possibilities. Saturday arrived with a nervous energy that had me cleaning already clean surfaces and rearranging flowers that were perfectly arranged. I had decided on a simple but elegant menu for dinner: roast chicken with herbs, garlic, mashed potatoes, and a salad with homemade vinaigrette. Familiar comfort food that would hopefully create a relaxed atmosphere for what promised to be a difficult conversation. As I checked the chicken roasting in the oven, I found myself rehearsing what I might say to Margaret. How could I make her understand that my need for boundaries wasn't a rejection of her or the children, that I could still be a loving, involved grandmother without being at their beck and call? At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my hands over my apron, took a deep breath, and went to answer it. Margaret and Kyle stood on the porch, Kyle holding a bottle of wine, Margaret's expression carefully neutral. She was wearing the blue dress I'd complimented last Christmas, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. It struck me that she had made an effort for this dinner, which seemed like a positive sign. "Come in," I said, stepping back to allow them entry. "Dinner's almost ready." "Something smells good," Kyle offered, handing me the wine. "Roast chicken?" "Your nose is as sharp as ever," I smiled, accepting the bottle. "It's just about done." We moved to the living room, where I had set out a small cheese plate and crackers. The conversation was stilted at first, revolving around safe topics: Kyle's work, the weather, an upcoming school fundraiser. Margaret contributed little, her posture stiff, her eyes often drifting to the family photos on my mantel. When I excused myself to check on dinner, she followed me into the kitchen. "Need any help?" she asked, the question so familiar it made my heart ache a little. You could toss the salad, I suggested, gesturing to the bowl I had prepared earlier. She moved to the counter, picking up the wooden spoons I always used for salad. For a moment, we worked in companionable silence, the familiar choreography of preparing a meal together briefly superseding the tension between us. Emily says she's been visiting you, Margaret said finally, her eyes on the salad she was tossing. Yes, we've been discussing her literature assignment. To Kill a Mockingbird. Margaret nodded. She mentioned that, said you had interesting perspectives. I smiled at that. She's very insightful herself. You've raised a thoughtful young woman. We have, she agreed, and there was a hint of pride in her voice. Then, after a pause, Mom, what's really going on? This sudden need for boundaries, this withdrawal. Is it something I did? Something I said? The question was so earnest, so genuinely puzzled, that it caught me off guard. Had she truly not seen the imbalance in our relationship? The way her demands had gradually consumed my life? It wasn't any one thing, Margaret, I said carefully, checking the potatoes. It was a pattern that developed over time. After your father died, I threw myself into helping with your family. It gave me purpose when I was grieving. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being a choice and started being an expectation. My time, my energy, my resources, they were all assumed to be at your disposal. That's not fair, she protested. We appreciate everything you do. Do you? I turned to face her fully. When was the last time you asked about my interests, my needs, my life outside of what I could do for your family? When was the last time you invited me over just to spend time together, not because you needed childcare or help with something? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, a small furrow appearing between her eyebrows as she searched for examples and came up empty. And when I did express a need to keep my physical therapy appointment, for instance, I was excluded from your birthday dinner, cut off, punished. I was upset, she said defensively. You left us in a difficult position. I understand that, I acknowledged, but consider my perspective. I had been helping your family in countless ways for years. The one time I couldn't accommodate your request for a legitimate health reason, the response was to exclude me completely. How do you think that made me feel? Margaret looked down at the salad, her fingers gripping the wooden spoons tightly. I didn't think about it that way, she admitted finally. That's part of the problem, I said gently. You haven't had to think about my perspective because I've always prioritized yours. But I'm 73 years old, Margaret. I have limited energy, limited time. I want to spend it wisely with purpose and joy. That includes being a grandmother to Emily and Tyler, but it can't be all-consuming. It can't be only on your terms. She was quiet for a long moment, absently stirring the salad that was more than adequately tossed. So what are you saying? You don't want to be involved with the kids anymore? No, that's not what I'm saying at all, I hastened to clarify. I want to be involved as their grandmother, to attend their events, to have them visit, to share in their lives and interests. What I don't want is to be treated as an on-call babysitter or errand runner without consideration for my own schedule or needs. The timer on the oven beeped, saving us from the heavy silence that had fallen. I turned to remove the chicken, and Margaret moved to get the plates from the cabinet where they had always been kept. Dinner's ready, I called to Kyle, who appeared in the doorway, wineglass in hand. We gathered around the dining table, and I couldn't help but notice the empty chairs where Emily and Tyler would normally sit. Their absence felt symbolic somehow. This was an adult conversation, a renegotiation of relationships that had grown tangled and imbalanced. Kyle raised his glass. To family, he said simply, and to finding better ways to support each other. I met his eyes, grateful for the sentiment, and we all drank to that. The meal progressed more easily than I had anticipated. Kyle shared a funny story about a client. Margaret talked about a new project at work, and I found myself telling them about my watercolor class in the farmer's market I'd discovered. It felt like a glimpse of what our relationship could be, adults sharing their lives, listening to each other, finding genuine interest in one another's experiences. As I served coffee and a simple apple tart for dessert, Margaret set her fork down and looked at me directly. "I've been thinking about what you said in the kitchen," she began, "about the pattern that developed, and I think you might be right." I felt a rush of emotion, relief, validation, hope, that kept my expression calm. After Dad died, you were so eager to help, to be involved, and we needed it, with the kids being younger and our careers demanding so much. It was convenient, easy to rely on you. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Maybe too easy. It was a comfort to me, too, I assured her. Being needed, having purpose, but over time it became unbalanced. "I think I've been afraid," she continued, her voice softer now, "afraid of losing you like we lost Dad. As long as you were there, involved in every aspect of our lives, it felt like you were safe, secured." The insight struck me deeply. I hadn't considered that Margaret's demands might have been rooted in fear, in the trauma of Harold's sudden death. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. "I'm not going anywhere, Margaret," I said gently. "Setting boundaries doesn't mean I love you or the children any less. It just means I need to love myself too." Kyle reached over and placed his hand over Margaret's. "We've taken advantage," he said, a frankness that surprised me. "We've built our lives around your availability, your willingness to help. That's not fair to you, and it's not teaching our children the right lessons about family relationships." Margaret nodded slowly. "So what do we do now? How does this work going forward?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the opening to move from acknowledgement to action. "I think we need clearer communication," I said. "If you need my help with the children, ask in advance when possible. Respect that I might not always be available. And perhaps we could establish some regular times for me to see the children that work for everyone's schedule, Sunday dinners maybe, or an afternoon each weekend." "That seems reasonable," Kyle agreed. "And I'd like to be invited to family events as a guest, not as staff," I added, "to enjoy Emily's debate competitions or Tyler's basketball games as their grandmother, not as their chauffeur or caretaker." Margaret's eyes welled with tears unexpectedly. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice thick. "I didn't see what was happening, how we were treating you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I didn't set clear boundaries earlier," I acknowledged. "That's on me. But we can move forward differently now." We talked late into the evening, working through practical considerations, how to handle school pickups, weekend arrangements, emergency situations. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were moments of tension, of old patterns threatening to reassert themselves, but it was a beginning, a foundation for a healthier relationship. As they were preparing to leave, Margaret hung back while Kyle went to start the car. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "Emily mentioned something about a farmer's market you visited. She said there were crafts and local food. It sounds like something the kids might enjoy. I recognized the olive branch for what it was, an expression of interest in my new activities, an invitation to share them with the family. It's lovely, I confirmed. Open every Saturday morning. Perhaps we could all go together next weekend. I'd like that, she said, and impulsively leaned in to hug me. It wasn't our usual quick embrace, but something longer, deeper. I do love you, Mom. I'm sorry I lost sight of how to show it properly. I love you too, I whispered, holding her close for a moment before letting go. Always have, always will. After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, a strange lightness in my chest despite the emotional intensity of the evening. It hadn't been a perfect reconciliation, those exist only in storybooks, but it had been honest, a genuine attempt to understand each other and to forge a new path forward. My phone chimed with a text message. I expected it to be from Margaret or Kyle, perhaps a final thought from our conversation. Instead, it was from Walter. Hope your dinner went well. Looking forward to our date next week. I smiled, feeling a flutter of anticipation. Another new beginning, another facet of this renaissance I was experiencing. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was lined with years, with experiences both joyful and painful. But the eyes were bright, alive with possibility. I thought about the journey of the past few weeks, from taken-for-granted grandmother to woman reclaiming her identity, her independence, her joy. It had started with a single boundary, a necessary no when every instinct trained over decades had urged me to say yes, regardless of the personal cost. That one boundary had led to others, had created space for new experiences, new connections, new understandings. And here I was, Eleanor Barnes, 73 years old, and discovering that life still held surprises, still offered growth and change and possibility. I had baked my last birthday cake out of obligation, but there would be others baked with love, with choice, with the knowledge that my time and energy were valuable gifts to be given, not resources to be depleted. Tomorrow, I would work on my watercolor painting. I would call Beth to update her on the dinner. I would take my daily walk, perhaps exploring a new route through the neighborhood. And next Saturday, I would introduce my family to the farmers market, would watch Emily's debate competition, would continue building this new relationship based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The last birthday cake had marked an ending, but endings, I was learning, often cleared the way for new and unexpected beginnings.